The world is complex, the Bible is complex. Human existence is a tangled ball of experience, perception, and understanding. Ravel is a puzzling word, denoting both a tangling and untangling. This podcast attempts to hold honest conversations in good faith. Some ideas expressed in this podcast will be challenging. Others will be obvious. When a PhD in biblical interpretation and a habitually podcasting man-child discuss matters of society, scripture, and scandal, you get Ravel.
Hey everybody, you are listening to Ravel, and it's me, your best buddy Basil. And with me, you know him, is the satirical, the hilarious, the Jesterian Dr. Christopher Ryan Gates. Hi, dude.
Hi, dude.
Hi, funny man.
What's up?
You know, I'm pretty methodical when it comes to starting any podcast, but sometimes, you know, I like to mix it up instead of, how you doing, buddy? Hi, dude.
Yeah, that was definitely caught me off guard.
Gotta keep them on their toes, folks.
One of the great elements of comedy.
Yeah, yes, the surprise, the abandoned expectations. I don't know. I just made that up, but thanks everybody for being here. This is a good episode. We are continuing our Artists On mini-series here, and we're wrapping it up, but we could not finish a series here on Ravel without including some sort of heretic, and that's who we have today. And of course we say that lovingly, but today we have Elliott Morgan, who is a comedian and a writer and a friend, and also he is best buddies with Peter Rollins, who you've listened to on the show, and does a podcast with Pete. And, you know, we needed Elliott. Some interesting things. You know, there's a conversation to be had about whether comedy counts as art, but in this day and age, I think we can count it as art if we're trying to get artsy-fartsy about it, Chris. Mm-hmm. But it's so much more than that. So we are happy to present our wonderful conversation with Elliott Morgan. What did you think about it? We just finished. This is when we do our intros and outros, folks, just so you know how this works around here. So it's fresh and we remember what's going on. But Chris, do you remember anything from the past 2 hours?
So long ago. I do. Yeah, it was, I don't know if I said it on the air or not, but it'll be in 2 hours from now if I did. I was expecting a really good conversation. I think we had talked about in the past that there's a certain amount of intelligence that comes along with comedy. I mean, you have to be smart in order to be funny. So when you talk about having somebody on who has a history in stand-up comedy like Elliot does, you know that they're going to be a smart guy. But I was just really pleasantly surprised the way that the conversation went, some of the insights that he had. We talk a little bit about his spiritual journey as well, as we can't help but do here on this show. And he has some nice insights there, and then kind of into the practice of his comedy. And he also is pursuing degrees right now. I think he said he's still finishing up his master's and then plans to go on and do a PhD in psychology,
depth psychology.
Yeah.
And
we
the trippy stuff.
Get to talk about that, but it's great because it gives us an excuse to have him back on again. So
I know that I would like to say that that was the master plan all along, not talk about one of the most interesting things about him so we could bring him back. But it was on accident. But we do look forward to talking with him again, more about that kind of stuff.
A really fun conversation. And I just couldn't believe, I said this off the air, but I just couldn't believe how quickly the 2 hours went by. It was just fun listening and talking back and forth. So you guys are really going to enjoy this one.
Yeah, indeed. We talk about comedy, we talk about art, we talk about self-deprecation, we talk about comedy, the truth in comedy, we talk about where God fits into the whole thing, and you'll hear about Elliott's spiritual journey, which is the lens through which all of us sort of process the world and then outwardly express what bubbles up from beneath. And yes, I of course joke about the heresy thing, but I mean, you'll hear it. But an incredibly authentic, intelligent and lucid individual that we enjoyed the convo very much with. So I think we're probably ready to jump in. What do you say?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Put on your silly hats, folks, because it's time for the funny hour here on Ravel. And away we go. Here we are. It's finally happened. We're all very excited. Everybody agrees. We have Elliott Morgan on the line, comedian, writer, friend, member of the Valley Folk, and co-host with, you guys remember, Peter Rollins. Yeah, he does a podcast with him called The Fundamentalists, which is one of those media properties that you should go enjoy, or at least look at it. And if you don't enjoy it, just keep it to yourself. But until we talk more and explore that more, let's first say hi to Elliott Morgan. What's up, buddy?
Hey guys, thank you for having me. This is I was just listening to one of your previous episodes. So
you were doing your research.
I was doing a little research. Yeah, I've made the mistake before of not doing that, and so I gave it a go, and it's lovely. And I got to tell you, it is Basil, right?
Yes.
Am I saying that right? You got a very soothing voice, man. I just want you to know.
Oh my gosh.
Every time.
He's just
Really? You get that a lot?
I didn't.
Yeah, he does.
Usually it's not soothing, is not
something
the often, but yes, it's something. I've got a something voice, which is good. I mean, just for any potential, guests out there who may be listening to this episode as research, just know that is a wonderful way to start the podcast. Because, it's become sort of clear to me that those critics I have out there who think I'm, a little bit self-involved or perhaps a little bit too, good at what I do and too good for them. It's the only way that it works. If it weren't that way, then I wouldn't do anything. But, enough about me. Well, no, not quite enough about me, Elliot. Tell me another great thing about me.
Oh, well, I got to tell you, the look you have in this Skype profile photo harkens back to some sort of Muppet, some sort of non-human entity, and that's nice because it makes me question a lot. And I think that's the point of your podcast, so thank you.
You get it? Thank you very much. Which, I am curious, which episode did you listen to, or at least begin to listen to?
I listened to about half, I think, of the episode that you guys did with Jay Baker.
Oh, yeah. Great one.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Half. It was fun.
He was swinging.
You got the first half, so you got like the rowdy parts. I promise, when you listen to the second half, it really lands in a really loving and wonderful place. Yes, but you got the warlike zone. Okay, that's it. Here we go. Now we're starting the podcast, Elliot. Tell us a little about yourself. Like, what do you do? Who are you? What's going on inside your heart?
Oh, thank you so much. Well, yeah, my name is Elliot, as was mentioned. I do comedy and I do some podcasts. I'm with a group called the Valley Folk. We kind of are on a Valley Folk light thing now, so it doesn't take up too much time. And I'm in graduate school. I should get my master's at the end of this year, God willing, and they'll decide if I get to go on to my PhD in depth psychology. And that's been very fun and informative, and I started doing that in 2020. And I live in Los Angeles, California, with my lovely fiance, who's currently out right now. So I'm sitting in my little hut outside the house that is my office that I call the Ellie Hut, my bat cave.
The Ellie Hut, that's good.
And it's right over the plate. Just it's so silly. And I do some stand-up. It's been difficult past couple years, obviously, but I really enjoy psychology and some philosophy, and of course grew up Christian, I would say, and have a deep appreciation and affinity for many things about the church, many things I don't have a deep appreciation for, which I'm sure you guys have heard ad nauseum, but big fan all around of all of these types of areas. I just get something in me gets really, really stoked and excited about it. And so I feel like I'm steeped in school, and so I don't have you won't get a lot of maybe hard and fast opinions out of me. I feel a little bit of a problem being like, I like that. That makes sense. And then 10 minutes later, I'll be like, okay, now I think this instead. And so that's a personal issue. So maybe you guys can help me with that.
It's like you're in student mode, you know?
Yeah.
You're learning.
I'm soaking it in.
Developing ideas and opinions still. And, you know, I mean, some would say that it's more valuable to be able to change your minds when the moment calls. I think it's very fun that, you know, you're look, we're all millennials around here. We're all getting a little older. We have moved into sort of a new era in media and access to things via the internet, which has changed so much even since when we were kids or whatever, younger people. And I do tend to sort of delineate YouTube 1.0 versus YouTube 2.0.
Yes.
And YouTube 1.0, I normally associate with like the Maya He guy. You remember the Maya He guy?
Maya Ho?
Exactly.
Oh, yes.
I consider that, you know, YouTube 1.0. And then YouTube 2.0 is whatever's happening now. Tell me, you know, I gotta be honest, I've never interacted that much with the Valley folk, but it is sort of a millennial fairy tale, the idea that friends can be funny together and then put it on the internet and find some version of success with that. So as far as like, I want to start with comedy because that was kind of your first thing, right? I mean, am I wrong? Did you come out the womb hoping to get a degree in philosophy, or
I didn't.
Did the funny come first?
Yeah, I think what came first was it was the fascination with entertainment in general. I grew up just doing theater and being a theater kid, and I went to an arts high school and just fell in love with it. And so then I went to college, and I was like, I'm going to challenge myself and study something that is not related to entertainment or acting or anything like that. And so I studied zoology, and I worked in animal hospitals for a very long time. I thought, I'll go to veterinary school. I love animals very much. Was very bad at it. Didn't do well. And
oh, no.
I thought I was
what
like,
does that mean? What happens if you're bad at veterinarian?
I just think that me not, yeah, well, you know what happens. And it's sad. No, I don't think I killed any creatures that I know of. But it was just a bunch of very difficult classes. It was like, zoology is like a biology degree, and it emphasizes a lot of ecology and evolution, and it was just way, way over my head. I was fascinated by it, but it just wasn't how my brain operated. And then after getting the degree, I was like, I'm going to try my hand in Los Angeles and see what happens. And I got very lucky, speaking of YouTube, that I got a job at a company called SourceFed. Was hired by a guy named Phil DeFranco, who's still doing stuff. He was part of this Google initiative, and he hired me, Joe Beretta, Lee Newton eventually, and it sort of grew and blew up from there. And then I left, started doing stand-up, different hosting gigs and that kind of thing. And then, yeah, we all kind of tried to get the gang back together for Valley Folk and see, you know, if lightning could strike twice. And it kind of did. We won NBC's Bring the Funny in like 2019, and we had an incredibly supportive kind of cult-like audience. But, you know, one thing they said, because I get the title of founder of the Valley Folk, because I was like the kid in Mighty Ducks being like, let's Quack Attack is back, Jack, let's do it. And everyone that I sought advice from who had done companies was like, you know what they say, which is don't go into business with your friends. And I was like, no, I'm sure that's good advice, but I'm immune to it, and I'm special, and we can be special, and it won't affect us. And it certainly did. So it got a little hairy there toward the end, but it was an experiment, and in some ways it worked. But I certainly learned a lot from it, which was nice.
Look at you with your good attitude. That's incredible.
Did you see how I made that? Yeah, I really waxed it nice at the end there.
Yes, that's why Dr. Chris and I have promised to one another that we would never become friends. And that
there you go. That's the way you do it.
Yes.
We actually mildly disdain each other.
Oh,
no, and that comes
mildly.
across. Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah. It started mild. Like, we tried to manufacture a mild disdain. But I'm really happy. Like, it's a really beautiful story. It really grew into sort of an authentic and overwhelming sort of rivalry that will go on for the rest of our life. Yeah.
Right. So your deathbeds.
I'm wondering, I did not do all of my due diligence. I have looked into some of your work, as we talked about before the show, but is this kind of similar to like, and I'm not saying anybody's ripping anybody off, but like Bert Kreischer has this deal, right, where he gets together with a bunch of comedians and they just sit around and cook out. Mm-hmm. And is that the same sort of? Is it just a bunch of funny people getting together and turning on a camera and seeing what happens?
Yeah, it's a bunch of people who, at our height, I think we developed in sort of this like pressure cooker in 2012 when we sort of just the explosion with which SourceFed initially took off was, I think, very psychologically kind of damaging, but it was so much and so much exposure at once that we sort of made this strange bond where the way we survived was we just tried to make each other laugh all the time, and then everyone kind of went their separate ways, came back, and now we're going our separate ways again. But all very dear people to me. But yeah, it is like that. I mean, it's sketches. It was a weekly show that we did called Your Show. It was a podcast, which is still going on, and a bunch, and then like sort of the sorry, it's got a text message. I got a little distracted there. I'm not gonna respond to it. So what do you think about that?
You can read it to all of us if you want.
Yes, somebody's asking for my partner's phone number. I'm like, I don't like. I'm not gonna do that. But anyway,
that's so spicy.
I know. Excuse me. Yeah, let's switch topics. I'm just gonna respond to him right now. No. But we did and then what I've really enjoyed doing was at SourceFed, it was comedy news. So we did 5 videos a day. We'd get up at like 6 a.m. We'd go into work, or we were at work at 6. We had the first video written and shot by 7. It was edited and up by 9 a.m. And we did it like time and time again every single day. So at that time we were, 5 videos a day on one YouTube channel, and they're all sort of exploding, and it puts you in this world where you have to learn to write very quickly about current events, and that was always very fun. So all of like the news comedy is kind of what my ultimate goal would be, but that'll be years down the line.
I love it. I
just looked it up. Bert Kreischer, Something's Burning is the one I was thinking of.
Oh, really?
And that didn't debut until 2018, so he ripped you off.
Yes, he did.
If we were ripping anybody off, but
I was ripped off SNL. I think we definitely were trying to rip off very hard, as much as we could.
I was Joe Rogan. I was listening to him one time, and he was talking about the fact that when he gets together with all of his comedian friends, it's always because I guess comedians are so used to people trying to get laughs, or they themselves getting laughs and things like that, that there's a whole different dynamic when it's just comedians together, where there's a whole different kind of level that you have to go to in order to get a laugh out of people. I'm kind of curious as to what that's like for you to be in a room full of kind of your peers who are kind of experts at the same craft that you're in yourself and you're continually trying to perfect. Is it like does it feel like a competition, or is it kind
all
of
the time?
Yeah.
Every time. No, it at some point you run out of body parts to show people to try to get a rise out of them, and then that's when you start going, okay, maybe we know each other too well, and we know what can poke each other in funny ways and annoying ways, and so then you just sort of regress into just the most basic childhood, potty humor, and it is
you regress
wonderful, but
the foundation of humor. I love that. Now, I am fascinated by this idea of the success, the trauma of success. I mean, it sounds like the way you described it was sort of a meteoric rise in 2012, which I would say is sort of the phase 1 of YouTube 2.0. Like that's when a real big shift happens. And you kind of described it in a way where it was sort of a rocket taking off, and you all just kind of had to hold on tight and see what happens. And I think it's a really unique aspect of younger generations, the more recent generations. But of course, like I said, we're all the best generation, the millennials here. This is sweet.
Absolutely.
We're so damaged, but also very talented. The aspect of sort of the trauma of success and this term that gets bandied about of trauma bonding and how it's a very powerful force. Just tell me more about that. Speak.
Go.
Go.
I like that term, trauma bonding. That has like a nice ring to it. It sounds like a band from the 90s.
Right.
Trauma
It's very
Bond.
millennial. It's like it's almost like a pop punk band that influenced us all very much in high school.
Exactly. They opened for Weezer in 98, I think, which was really cool. But it's it is something I still process a little bit. My partner also, we met through kind of the YouTube zeitgeist, and they had this convention that was similar to Comic-Con called VidCon, and we'd all sort of meet people who were kind of coming up at this same time. And I think it's a difficult balance, because I feel like at times I'm like, I can become the old man screaming at kids about social media, being like, this is really got like dangerous quality. Like this is so new, and it's so it's become so intertwined into like every aspect of our lives, and so I can get really like you gotta unplug the phone. But then I'm like, pretty much every aspect of my life that I have that has worked and that I'm really thankful for has something to do with social media too. And the audience that we got, that much of them still enjoy what we do and support us. It's like we hit at this weird time where I think the audience and us were sort of coming of age in our own ways, and that was because of that, it just sort of cemented us all together as this little cult group, both with the audience and the performers. And so now it's like years later, you're like, okay, well, this is, I think, being the age I am, which is this perfect millennial, being the last generation to remember not having the internet, but also not being an older generation that I think is getting also really swept up in it by like Facebook and stuff. Being in that little Goldilocks area and having some experience with it, I think gives a slightly different perspective. That's neither like this is totally bad and also how wonderful TikTok. Like it's a very complex area, and I get very I'm really curious and a little maybe worried about how it's going to develop over the next 10 years. And I read this article I think it was last week, maybe it was the Atlantic or something, but it's something about how teenagers now are like they're having tics return, like they're getting tics again, and it's like the TikTok rise of TikTok. Gosh. And
it's like it's become what is it, like a contagious form of Tourette's. It's interesting. I've been podcasting since 2012 and just celebrated our 10-year anniversary. And
congrats.
And thank you very much. And I do a news talk show. And we just read that article about how TikTok influencers who have Tourette's are like spreading Tourette's through social media. Yeah. There's like whole groups of kids who, follow these influencers, and, there's a debate. They don't know if they have just like a genetic exposure,
predisposition, I think.
Something like that to Tourette's. They don't know it, whether that's the case or not, but like there's this one cheerleading team, and they all followed this influencer who has Tourette's, and they all started having uncontrollable tics.
That's so wild.
Of course, unsurprisingly, completely mirrored the tics of their favorite influencer. But yeah, so when you talk about this, what exactly we think we know what's going on with like social media and the tech, the tech saturation. I mean, there's a saturation of technology that we have never experienced before. And yes, of course, I just told this story on another show, but when it was 2012, I was just out of college, and I'd been talking to my college buddies for like a while, and I'm kind of like a weird conspiracy type person. I'm like, guys, Facebook, they're tracking everything. They know everything you're doing. They're building like a cybernetic model of you that they use to advertise. And everybody's like, dude, you are crazy. Please go and put on your tinfoil hat and go in your weird cabin in the woods and drink your own pee for a while and just come back when you're normal. And then it was just like a couple months ago, they're like, I was talking to one of my buddies, and it's like, dude, we are all talking and we can't believe it. You were just right about everything.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, that's what happens, man. First it was the cotton gin ruined the industrial, the halcyon days before the Industrial Revolution. And now, society is being merged into a sort of hive mind that will be, transfer our consciousness off world, and then the aliens will come and get us.
I mean, that sounds right.
I mean, I've been right about pretty much everything so far.
Yeah, I actually don't disagree too much. And I also think it gives you all of the social media platforms are designed to give you this sense of control that I think can fool you into thinking that it's real and that you aren't being affected, that, you choose to open it, you choose what filter you're going to put on, you choose how to edit it. And it gives you this idea that you are the master of your domain, and I don't believe that to be the case at all.
I'm so fascinated with the mixture or the interaction between technology and like the spiritual lives of human beings, and we're going to talk more about that. I'm so happy that you're open to that. But before we get too far, I do want to learn a little bit about your experience with the church, with God, with whatever. I mean, what was it? What was the context in your, early days of spirituality, or whatever word you want to put on that? I'm excited because I believe, from what I've heard of you and heard you talk about, the language. I mean, seems like you were totally in it, and wherever you are now, we can talk about that. But you obviously were sort of a native to church thinking, church participation, understanding sort of some broader aspects of reality. What was your experience there?
Yeah, I mean, my goodness, that was probably better said, I think, than I'll be able to do. I love the question because this is like, I'm so excited to be chatting with you guys because it is one of those things that I think about a lot, but I don't articulate out loud in succinct ways because it just lives in my head rent free, as the kids like to say. So it's nice to be able to kids. At least, the youngins, the TikTokers. But so I guess, I was definitely very, 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 very into it, and really like my whole sort of personality, I think, was largely built around it as a kid. What age
were we talking? Were you born into a church family, or did you find it? How did that go?
Yeah, I was born into it, I would say. So I grew up in Central Florida in Polk County, called a little town called. You go Polk County?
I'm in Central Florida. We're neighbors.
Oh, nice.
Pasco, buddy.
Where?
Pasco.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool.
You're the only ones more redneck than us.
Yeah. Oh, we take the cake, for sure. Or we take the cooler of Bud Lights. But it was a wonderful time, wonderful place to grow up in. And so I guess I got out, so I don't know what that says. But did grow up in a church environment. My mom had already sort of been saved. She did her. She became really affiliated with this church called Carpenter's Home Church, which was,
yes, sir.
Oh my gosh, Florida brothers here.
Everybody knows Carpenters. That's where all the shows were at, man.
Yeah, dude.
They had the big old sanctuary. They put on all the concerts. Yeah.
Yep. My first concert was there. I think it was Newsboys, or maybe it was DC Talk. But so did that and went to the school that they had, Evangel Christian School, rest in peace, and did that for quite a while. I mean, that was up until 8th grade that I sort of was always in some sort of Christian private school, and really loved it, really, believed in it, was in it. I've heard some folks sort of talk about similar journeys that have been similar to my own, and I think what I've gleaned is that sometimes the response is like, oh, well, you weren't really in it if you sort of aren't anymore, because why would you leave if you were truly in it? And I don't subscribe to that because I was, I was there, but I remember it pretty vividly. And I remember I talk about this. I did a comedy special, which I would not, I shouldn't say this, but it's not exactly my favorite thing I've done, but I did an hour-long special where I talk quite a bit about this experience called Holy, I don't want to say the second word, but it sounds like crap. But
see, you have listened to the show. It's a family-friendly show.
Oh, yeah, and I try not to. I don't like all the swearings. I'm trying to get better at it too. But boy, once you start doing it, it's hard to put that back in the box. So anyway,
it's a good name for a comedy special, though. A comedy special where you're talking about your Christian childhood. That's a great name for it.
Thank you. Yeah, and it was also about my divorce. And I mean, looking back on it, I don't think it's a very funny special because I think I was really depressed at the time. But I was like, wow, I really said all that. Okay, cool. But the original title was actually Felix Culpa, which I'm sure, Christopher, you might know the
fortunate
Catholic.
fall.
Exactly, yeah. And so I realized no one on Earth would know what that means, so I switched it to something more vulgar. Yeah, very, very niche audience. But in it, I talk about this. I mean, I grew up around the time that the Holy Laughter revival was happening with Rodney Howard-Browne, and so I had days where I'm in second grade, and they would take us over to the sanctuary, and this guy, I just vividly remember. I think it happened multiple times, but he had, the anointing oil, and he put it on me, and it's all Pentecostal, all Assemblies of God, whatever it was, and charismatic. And I would say, I guess the term, correct me if I'm wrong, would be baptized in the Holy Spirit. But it was full on laughter. And I remember being in second grade and being like, that was like the realest moment, except maybe some other times in life when I've had weird, anomalous experiences. But that was, as a kid, I was like, there is no way that this is not exactly true, because I've had this experience where I could not stop laughing uncontrollably for a very long time. Like it was overflowing out of me. And that had, I think, a dark side as I grew older, because it sort of, I think, stunted my openness to even explore deeper into other areas of Christianity, let alone explore, other walks of faith or worldviews. And so it took a little bit of deprogramming, I think, to get out of that. And so that was, I guess,
very powerful, those experiences. I do want to take a moment to recognize. So part of the fun of this show is that Chris grew up and still very much is in the sort of Baptist tradition, and I grew up in the very charismatic and Pentecostal tradition. So we have this fun, sort of juxtaposition of
rivalry.
Yes, it's part of our rivalry.
Yeah, the Pentecostal service has to end first so you can beat the Baptists to the, what is that? That's that
to Denny's, yeah.
To Denny's.
And it's funny because very rarely do we have somebody on the show who also had the like full-on charismatic, touch of the Holy Spirit, experiential aspect of that tradition. And the whole thing, the laughing fits, the slain in the spirit, the undeniable realness of and sort of uncontrollable physical reaction to a spiritual reality is very powerful, and something that is almost impossible to ignore when coming in contact with other ideas, spiritual ideas or theologies or whatever, because the experience is just so powerful. It's unexplainable. And I can totally relate where having that experience floating around makes it difficult because, Dr. Chris here is a wealth of deep, impactful, wonderful, biblical, scholarly, but also, it's not just, I don't mean to say scholarly in sort of it's such a nerd type of way, but very, very important knowledge and things. But in the background, you're like, but that one time, the Holy Spirit filled me up and I lost complete control of my functions. And how do you explain that there, Pastor Chris?
Yeah. Well,
Pastor Dr. Chris.
This is the thing too, is that even, I mean, in the Baptist church, while there is this certain, threshold, I think, of that experientiality that, they will put a cap on, there is still undeniably the same sort of experience that Elliot was just talking about, that Basil, you would, agree with. And I think that I would say that I've even had, myself, where it's otherworldly. Now, the manifestation of that in the world around us, whether that's some kind of holy laughter or the falling out in the spirit, as they say, or the ecstatic dancing and even speaking in tongues and all of those different things, they will manifest themselves differently. But you can talk to anybody in a Baptist church and they're going to be like, have you ever experienced a time in your life when you felt an encounter from something that felt otherworldly, and there was this sort of, a peace either that just transcends all understanding, or there was some sort of revelation that you had, like Elliot was describing it, that you just knew this is not part of my normal human existence up to this point. There's something different going on in this moment. And yeah, I think that I'm curious,
so
as you're at this point.
Jesus loves Baptists too, Chris.
He does.
Right.
He does.
Fine.
We are also loved by
We'll allow
it. But I'm wondering where this is going now in your story, though, because no, it's I think it's good, because it does bring up the point. Sometimes Baptists do feel on the outside of these sorts of things, or even your Presbyterians and Methodists and all kinds of others. But so we all would say that we've had some kind of encounter where we would say it's more than just, I'm not just believing this because my parents taught it to me, but there's been something that's really transpired here. So where did you go from that? It seems like there was a disconnect after that somewhere. I'm curious what happened there.
Yeah, I always think about I think it's Bill Burr who has a bit on the sort of, when you say disconnect, like I think the analogy is that it's like sort of like a bowling ball. Like it wasn't for him, it wasn't a traumatic letting go or disconnect. He just sort of let it go. Or no, it was like curling. He just sort of fly, like, bye-bye. And I don't think it was quite like that for me, but I do know that growing up and then going from Christian private to public art school, that culture shock combined with puberty, and everything going on there, while still going to weekly sort of charismatic churches. And then it sort of just stopped. It was like, while other kids were like, well, you got to say no to drugs, I was like, well, I got to speak in tongues. Otherwise, God doesn't love me. And, I'm not cool anymore. And I think for me, it just became, looking back now, I go like, I don't know that that's something that should be put upon 8-year-olds whose like brains haven't formed yet. I think that looking back, it sounds creepier than I think it seemed like at the time. And so now I look back and I'm still curious about it. I'm still studying. A lot of depth psychology is very open to religious and spiritual experiences of all kinds. And it's interesting to have sort of different language to describe, or at least kind of circumvent the realness of it without ever fully explaining it, and without also not reducing it to just hypnosis. Because that's kind of what I landed on for a while. I was like, oh, I was an impressionable, highly believing, highly faithful child. And that, that's all of the recipes for hypnosis. And I think there's an element of that, but that's me speaking, and I've seen it with other people, and I'm growing up around it. I'm like, I don't know. I don't think that explains all of it. So I don't know if that answers the question at all.
Yeah.
So you had this, some authentic, impactful experiences in a Pentecostal tradition, which made it difficult to be open to the world in a lot of ways. I mean, very powerful sort of developmental things to happen at that age. Where to go from there? When you went into public school, was there a tension there? I understand you felt sort of a natural disconnect from sort of your normie friends, which I did as well. And there is sort of an alienating aspect. I mean, there are times when you are told by whether it's your parents or a Sunday school teacher who's basically a stranger, or at a big Pentecostal church like that, I'm sure you had speakers coming in who come and speak for a night or a weekend and then leave. So you've got all these different influences telling you a lot of times, be separate from the world. Don't be like your friends. We're held to a new standard. Again, which, my gosh, has so many benefits. I'm appreciative for that in my life. But you could see how that would be difficult as you're trying to grow up and feel like a child connected to other people in the world.
Yeah, I also think if you're a teenager and you got hormones raging and you're going through a phase of your life where you feel like you're invincible and unstoppable, it can maybe not serve your best interests to also believe that you have a secret connection with the divine that other people don't have. And that I think I would chalk that up to being a pretty unlikable elitist kind of trait that I think I had a little bit in high school. But then, yeah, I mean, I did after high school, I went to community college, and then I went to the University of Florida where I finished the zoology degree, and I got married very, very early. I got married when I was, I got engaged when I was 19, married when I was 20. And
were you still you considered yourself a Christian and everything?
Oh yeah.
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 You've
absolutely.
survived your evolution classes at zoology school?
We're not that far along. That comes later. That's next chapter. No. The evolution, I do love evolution, but I would not call that even that did not sort of make me go. It really did. It was a gradual process of going, it still feels for it still doesn't feel it. Something isn't right. Something isn't clicking for me anymore. And it is starting to feel more and more performative. And then even like getting married very young, was a crazy move. And I know part of the reason for it was because I really wanted to make everybody happy. I wanted to be a good kid, and I wanted to do the right thing, and I wanted to not go to hell. And so I did, if I was gonna, if breaking up with someone was gonna make them sad, I was going to do everything I could to make sure that didn't happen, and wanted to protect them and be a man, and grow up ahead of my time as fast as I could. And so that also, with church and college and all this other stuff, and then moving to Los Angeles, which of course, it's a vat of heathens out here.
Den of vipers.
Den of vipers. And hippies. But so that's basically the trajectory. And then I got divorced when I was, I think, 25, 26 or something like that. And that was a situation where, and I do equate a lot of this with a sort of that desire, and I'm not saying this is a good thing, it definitely wasn't, but a desire to please everyone constantly ultimately led to me just blowing the marriage up entirely. And when that happened, it was I would say probably the existential crisis that people talk about, and it was a reframing of everything. It was like, all right, if I'm doing this, I'm going to take it all apart and see what sticks, and then see where I land. And that's when I started getting into a lot of reading, and it starts with self-help, and then it got into philosophy, and then now more psychology, and it just became
slippery slope.
Yes,
the slippery slope of self-help to philosophy to psychology, and now look at you.
I know. Goodness gracious.
So what do you feel like did stick after the deconstruction and throwing it all against the wall?
It's funny. That's a great question. Was that Christopher? That was Christopher. Right?
Yeah.
It was, which I'm very, this part I get really excited about, because some of the stuff, it gets to like, oh God, it's like, oh man, I forgot about all that. It's amazing how I'm really great at not thinking about it. But I did the deconstruction thing. I did this sort of like nihilistic, like, we're all alone and everything's meaningless, and I think that is a understandable position given what was happening with me spiritually, professionally, personally, and basically every way. around that time. I mean, it was like a dip. It was a fall pretty much in every context that you could imagine. And so there was this really dark sort of, I didn't think it was dark at the time. I thought it was correct. And I thought it was, again, going back to that kind of almost secret knowledge fallacy. And then as time has gone on, similar to, I think, the way out of the Christianity that I was born into, there has been so many moments in my life in recent years where it's become impossible for me personally to not believe that there is a force outside of myself that is playing an active role in my life. And my place with it now is a little bit more playful. I think it's a little bit more open, and it's a little bit more a la carte, I guess. But it feels really nice. It feels like coming up for air a little bit without flying off into the sky and thinking that I know better than everybody, which was my 14-year-old self.
I love that description of the playfulness, and the sort of roller coaster ride that you're experiencing. I love it precisely because of the reason that it is so common and often unspoken. And in the conversation we had with Jay Baker, which I'm glad you listened to, Jay, right?
Yeah, great guy.
Yeah. The theme that stuck with me with Jay was that, there are these roller coaster. Life is long. It's also short, but it is long. And if there was no existential roller coaster, I feel like life would feel long in the wrong way. There's something about those phases and the experience of being brought up in a way. Of course, we should bring our children up in the way they should go, but then finding that for yourself. And I think there's an interesting conversation to be had about, the what I believe is sort of a purposeful, delayed development when it comes to being an adult, at least in America. You're talking about, 26. You're going through this spiritual existential roller coaster, and I want to believe that in the past this all happened much earlier, but who knows? But going,
I would agree. I think it did.
Yeah, finding this low point as far as certainty and faith and things like that. Like with Jay, when he found himself in that place, of course, he has very special circumstances. The church was not there to be a part of that. There was a disconnection there. And I feel like if it was sort of built into the church system, I'm not talking about sort of the biblical concept of the collective peoples, God's people, but really the evangelical church as a system. If somewhere built in that system was like an allowance or a process for these moments in life where you're at some sort of low point, that was met with mercy and grace and a sort of direction to help rebuild something that works for you, it would be significantly more helpful. But what it seems like is when people find themselves there, they're sort of alienated. Either they alienate themselves because they feel like they have to, or they just want to do it on themselves, or the church is kind of like, well, you better shape up or ship out, buddy, because the rules around here. And being in that little zone, everybody has a different experience and has it at different times, but it seems to be incredibly natural. That's a long, rambling way for me to say, yeah, that's like an incredibly relatable moment that you were in, trying to figure it out. Would you say that in any way you could, where you were rebuilding and have rebuilt thus far, that you could see the church being a place where you would feel belonging where you're at?
where I'm at now, I don't see that. I don't see it at least in the traditional. I don't think I see it in the way that you are asking. I think I'm trying to, with things with school and sort of where I'm at now in life, is I'm kind of giving myself as much freedom as I can, specifically in my 30s, to learn as much as I possibly can. And so that, to me, I do see as a spiritual process. I don't know that I could return to a strictly sort of evangelical world view. I don't know how that could happen, but I guess it would depend on what you mean by that. In terms of a church and a church community, one of my buddies is a pastor here in Glendale, and I went to his church for a while, and he sort of has a congregation of people who have sort of fallen out of the church, had bad experiences, and you know that whole crowd, and I'm sure you can relate to it. And even that, I was like, well, this is cool. This is cool. But right now I'm enjoying learning about all of it. Learning about, the Jungian stuff and the depth stuff is very, being very open to it. It has given me a type of lens that I think has restored a deep, deep respect for biblical Christianity, but the respect has not yet translated into like an actionable thing where I'm like, oh, I'm back in. Like, I don't know. It feels like it's like the idea of the prodigal son being a bit of a story of a tragedy. It's like you were so close. You were out partying and you were having a great time. Like you were almost there. Why?
That's funny. We actually have not talked about that in that context on the show. And I mean, it's one of my favorite parables. But yes, I have heard some more radical philosophers and theologians talk about the prodigal son as a tragedy, that the fact he came crawling back was actually a sad ending versus maintaining his sort of independence. It's such a Luciferian idea. Come back to the Father, Elliot. Come on, man.
Yeah, I think what I worry about is the escape from the world. I think is not. I love this. I'm getting really into a guy right now named James Hillman, who was a post-Jungian scholar, and he wrote a book called The Soul's Code, which was pretty popular, and another book called Revisioning Psychology. But he has this really great essay called Peaks and Vales, and or Peaks and Valleys. And what I try to steer clear of, and maybe this is partially because it goes back a little bit to comedy, but any kind of spirituality or religion that takes you into the clouds, so to speak, where you look down on everyone, and this is like speaking metaphorically, like even like this is Los Angeles, where there's people around every corner with the crystals, and they got their their chakras are clear, and their whatever, and their auras, and it's all like great, that's fine. But sometimes you meet folks like that and you can't connect with them. There's a blankness. There's like they look like the eyeballs that you have as your profile photo, Basil, the big Google. Like there's just an emptiness where it's like they're almost floating. And Hillman makes this really cool distinction about soul being down low, soul and spirit, like spirit high above. Soul is where you get into the nitty gritty, everyday dirt of life. And I would hate to go in any direction that would remove me from that. I do agree with a lot of existentialists that in areas of depression, even though it may not feel like that, that is often where you are closest to what I would say is soul or the other, because that's,
Well, of course we love that here because, when you think about the story of Jesus and the concept of God, being on earth in the mud and the smell and the dust and the, touching the most untouchable people, and that being such a beautiful and rebellious act compared to what we would think God should be doing. I think that fits in quite well with that. That's just my first step here until
that's the Jesus I like. Yeah,
to lure you back in where there's going to be an altar call at the end, so be ready.
I'll do it.
Yeah. Where was I? Oh, yes. Okay, so this, and this idea, just for me to pontificate for a second. And Chris, I want to let you in here. Spring the trap, get them good. But the point that I love to bring up, and I'm sorry if anybody's tired of hearing me say this, the idea that like spirit and flesh are so divided that they're opposites, that spirit is good and it is up and it is far away and it is disconnected, and that flesh is here and it's bad and it's sort of the source of evil. I mean, one is evil, one is good, is fun to think about in the context of especially American evangelicalism, because that's originally, and Chris, you can learn me something if I get this wrong, but that originally is actually a heretical idea. It's a Gnostic theology. The heretics that were the Gnostics were the ones who developed this idea that spirit and flesh are separate, and flesh is bad and spirit is good, so you should disconnect from flesh and entirely live in the spirit and not come in contact with the unclean, even at the same time as the entire story of the biblical accounts of the salvation of humanity is based around God leaving the realm of pure spirit, entering the realm of flesh, and continuing not only to operate as divinity on earth amongst the creation, but also over and over trying to state that it is not what goes into your mouth that makes you unclean. It's what comes out of your mouth. It's not the touching of dirty things that makes you dirty, but instead you make them clean, that sort of thing, which is, you could see a direct connection to why the Gnostics were so heretical, because they were coming, that the idea that spirit and flesh are separate and opposite is pretty antithetical to the very words that describe Jesus's time on earth. Anyways, I love that. I love what you're talking about here.
I'm very curious about what to know more on that. So maybe after this, if you have any recommendations on the the Gnostic origins. I know it goes back past Descartes, but my understanding was Descartes was the one who really played a big role in the separation of the spirit and matter, or mind and body, and that right before the scientific revolution happened. So I would love to know more about who said that and where that came from, and what their justification was for it, because I haven't heard that.
Yeah, it's very. I mean, of course, there were Hellenistic ideas of the separation of spirit and flesh, but the Gnostics, they were enemies of the church for a long time, just for spouting that idea. Chris, you might actually have more of the scholarly info on it. I don't know if you have it on the tip of your tongue, but we can certainly discuss that after if it's a thing.
Yeah, it's people will say that John, in some of his writings, in the early first century, was addressing Gnosticism, but most scholars are not going to put that until somewhere out into the 200s, its original origin. So John is perhaps addressing some kind of fledgling form of it there. But I mean, right there in the early, years of the church in the first century and second century AD, there it was coming up. But it was that kind of separation. And then there's the Docetism that comes in there too, and that's kind of what you were talking about, Basil, with how they were trying to correct that Jesus was actually flesh and spirit, and they said he didn't actually have a real body. It was just kind of like this mirage he put out in front of everybody.
Hologram Jesus.
Hologram.
Oh,
Jesus. Yeah. But it goes way back to the early ages of the church. I don't have anybody. I've got a catalog of books right here sitting next to me. I can look into one of them.
Yeah.
We'll send you a bibliography
specifically. But off the top of my head, no.
But it kind of
very interesting. Yeah,
it kind of goes back to what you were talking about being 8 years old and feeling disconnected from your peers and feeling like it was your job to live on a higher plane of existence. That's a very I won't say that you were some sort of heretic as a child, but the roots of that within the modern church are are not the sort of original sentiments that were written down in the original languages. Yet we build our whole spirituality, our whole Christianity is built around that.
Yeah, I'm very fascinated by it because, and it is as much as I may not subscribe to the idea of Christianity, there is no part of me that ever thinks there won't be some very, very tender soft spot for Jesus himself. Like that stuff I can get behind all day. And I love so much of what he was and stood for, that it is a wonderful thing to still have. Because what I hate to see is when people throw out all the babies with all the bathwater and forget that there is such an incredible, like, real poetic beauty in Jesus and the things he said, and at the time he said them, which I always get a kick out of. It's like you guys could probably tell me more about this. And sorry, am I rambling? Sorry if I
No, you're good. We're chilling.
Y'all, it's I was reminded when you were talking of the story of, turn the other cheek, and then my understanding, and I'm not a biblical scholar by any stretch of the imagination, but my understanding was it was a more subversive act than many people believe, that there was something about the back of the hand of the Roman soldiers being what they used to slap Jews, and so turning the other cheek forced them to basically recognize you as an equal human. And so turning the other cheek was not just a pacifist move of, just let people walk all over you. It was a nonviolent protest, and that's been my understanding of it. And that kind of stuff I think is so relevant and so cool, but I also can't speak to its factualness as a.
I have heard interpretations similar to that, and I don't know either. I mean, that anybody can say specifically, but yeah, that phrase is couched in the middle of many other instructions that were given. That's along with going the extra mile if you're forced to
that was another one.
Somebody go 2 miles instead, and if they ask for your shirt, give them your cloak as well. And yes, there is a certain amount of not pacifism so much, but a killing them with kindness, a putting something on display that actually provokes a transformation in the person who would be offending or assaulting you. It's certainly not just to lay down and become a doormat for anybody, which unfortunately I think a lot of people do see it as that. I was actually just reading some article about some recent church goings on recently where someone was kind of giving that instruction to one of their parishioners who was in a bad situation. But I'm curious, as we're about an hour in and we've kind of been talking a lot about spirituality, and we haven't quite delved fully into the world of your comedy, but this was something that, as I knew that we were going to be talking with you about, and perhaps even in relation to the merging of kind of the the material and the spiritual, even as we were talking about. One of the things that I love about comedy so much, and I have some friends who are really big into stand-up, and they know all the guys that are current right now. Mine are pretty reserved to just like the ones I consider superstars, your Dave Chappelle's and Joe Rogan's, and generally the people who are a little more out there kind of in the controversial sort of matters. And that's kind of one of the things that I really like about it is the controversy. So I like the fact that you can't really censor comedians, try as you might, even this last bit that Chappelle just went through after his last special and everything. But there is this strange towing of the line. Actually, Jordan Peterson was talking about it when he was just on Joe Rogan's show here this last time, and he was talking about kind of the thrill and the sensation of standing right there just kind of with your toe on the line, and do I cross this little bound here, and the interaction that's going on with the audience and all of these different things. But I try to be, fair in my positions and in my understandings. And I think that we should be able to have a nice laugh at everything. But then if I'm being perfectly honest, when I listen to somebody, and you were even talking about like Bill Burr, and he every once in a while will get very antagonistic towards religion and Christianity. And then you can even go back, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Bill Hicks, but I would assume that you are. Yes, being a stand-up comedian.
You mean Alex Jones?
Yeah.
No. Right. Deep cut. Sorry.
His material was extremely antagonistic towards Christians. So there's this part where I will hear people sometimes, getting a laugh at the expense of something that you were talking about always having a soft spot in your heart for Jesus. I have, more than a soft spot. It's almost like this, overwhelming and consuming kind of spot. So people, I'm like, yeah, we should be able to laugh at everything, transgenderism and homosexuality and race and everything. And then it's like, oh, Jesus, ooh. And it provokes in me this kind of thing where it's almost like too sacred. And I was wondering, I have more to say, but I've already kind of talked a lot here. What I want to hear you comment on is what do you see the bounds or the appropriate kind of interaction with the sacred things in life, those things that are really going to, perhaps possibly offend people, and then, your ability or responsibility even as a comedian to kind of encroach into those areas.
Yeah, that is such a, I try not to have too hard and fast of kind of rules there, but I don't like hurting people's feelings. I don't think that's very funny, and even if I'm saying something, there's been so much, I've done jokes that I'm like, God, that's so, like, that was so, usually not even that funny. It's just like a provocateur joke to be like, look, I can say it, and I'm not super into that. I try to be as self-deprecating as possible. Part of that is because I enjoy self-deprecating humor, and I hate myself. No, and the other part is that it's a logistic choice, or it's a logical choice to be able to make yourself the punchline, because it's just kind of safer right now. And I don't feel, when I'm looking at certain groups or looking at whoever it is, that I don't know. I don't really like the like, well, the did. And it's like, okay. And I do think Christianity gets mocked all the time, to the point that I just don't think it's that funny anymore. The same way I don't think it's funny to make fun of somebody for being gay, because it's been done. A lot of that humor, I think, is like from the 90s, and it's like comedy clubs in New York where they're like, can you believe the woman and and it's like, okay, like, you just come off kind of I think it's lazy writing a lot, and I think that I try to
like take my wife jokes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Order another one. They can't catch us all on the way home. Like, what does that? Don't do that. Don't tell people to drink and drive. That's dangerous. So, in terms of those comedians, I think it's so crazy. Like, what they with all that stuff was happening with Chappelle. I can be a gullible, son of a gun, if that isn't clear yet from some of the other stories that we've talked about. But I remember reading everyone get so mad at Dave Chappelle, and I was like, well, I guess I'm not going to watch the new special. I guess it's really bad and it's really offensive, and I don't want to see him, be mean to trans people. And then one day I was like, you know what? This is still going on. People are still upset. There's like protests. Like, what did he say? And so I watched it, and then it ended, and I was like, I don't think he's your guy, y'all. Like, I don't think he's the one you got. I don't think he's the problem. Like, he helped me during shortly after he did, I forget what it's called. It's 7 minutes, something like that. It's his George Floyd special that he did right after in 2020 when all that went down. And I remember being like, this is he's just the best. Like, he is so good. And he did another thing, and I think he has some responsibility to bear, because he does it, he says it, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know, man. I think this is why I think a lot of people who are, quote, liberal end up getting they come off just really inconsistent at the very least, and annoying, and sometimes hypocritical, because you're like, this is like, pick an enemy, like go after, don't go after just the figurehead who's saying the thing that you don't like go after the structures that you disagree with and do it, and that takes more work than putting a tweet out there. So I'm not,
you don't get as many likes for that.
Exactly. Yeah. You arguably get none. And so how could we live without that? But yeah, I enjoy, I like Bo Burnham a lot. I mean, that's sort of you kind of legally have to say him as a millennial. And Pete Holmes, I think, is an excellent one for especially people who grew up in the church. I think he has a very good, joyful disposition about it. And I think that's refreshing to hear. And besides that, yeah, I try to just do stuff that, I mean, my last hour was called The Ridiculous Universe, and it was basically talking about aliens and talking about UFOs and weird synchronicities and things that have happened, because I'm like, these stories are at least interesting, and I like that more than sort of like, here's a one-liner about a guy who, pronouns, what's a it's like, all right. So I don't know if that answered your question or not. That was probably a rant that needs to be chopped up.
It feels like we're in an era where, I'm not a comedy historian, but I've been a really, really big appreciator of comedy for a long time, and in fact even tried my hand at it. It did pretty good on the local scene, but
nice.
No worries. But it seems like we're in a period in comedy history where you can actually do pretty well, be like having a positive disposition, whereas sort of the classic comedian of the early 2000s and the 90s and stuff like that was like, oh, it's the angry mean guy who's
George
the funniest.
Carlin.
Sure. Well, I mean, he's a genius, right? But the angry mean guy was like the thing for a long time. But like you're mentioning, Pete Holmes and others like that, who can have not just a positive disposition, but make appreciation of otherwise, derided life experiences be funny, and also speak to this reframing of what was originally considered the enemy of society. And in sort of a secular sense, you talk about the church, you talk about growing up in the church, you talk about, maybe the morals that were used to, rear children, stuff like that. It's very easy to come at that negatively. But it seems more and more of a path that can result in success, not that it does for everybody, where you can actually appreciate the weird parts of life. And
amen.
And which I love. And there's certainly people who feel this way. I don't know if it's necessarily canon in my own brain, but it seems like there is something about comedy that is a very effective road for God to travel down. There's of course,
well put,
even longer histories of comedy being sort of its own divine essence or whatever. I'm talking about in sort of other schools of spirituality. But is there something that you feel when you're doing comedy or searching for that, the perfect joke or something that has some sort of interaction with God or the spiritual realm?
There's been brief moments. I couldn't really describe them, but there has been times, and there's been times where it's felt the opposite, where it's felt like it's been all of a sudden I'm in a vacuum, which is, has value too, I guess. I always try to think of the role of the comedian as going back to, I think would be Hermes in Greek mythology, the communicator who sort of exists in the thresholds and the doorways, the openings. And it's the trickster who can communicate to both sides, communicate without getting killed the majority of the time, and I think that's a nice
trick,
value.
wasn't it? Yeah,
that was yeah, and I think that's what that I like, because I enjoy comedy that makes me think and that comes off sincere. I'm not always good at creating that on my own, but if you can get a comedian who can present ideas in a way that is palatable, that you don't agree with, I think that's where the art, really is, if we want to use such a fancy word. I love, like, for example, I think just in terms of delivery, Russell Brand's what he's doing now, I think, is a great example of how it's subversive in the sense that he's just like smiling his way through it. He's just going like, it's okay. You don't have to agree. Like, what about this? Like this, and I'm like, that's what I get inspired by, more so than pre-prepared kind of things. And he's also doing it in a way that's tied to current events. Like, he's doing it in a way that it keeps it topical. And I think people want that right now. I think gone are the days, like you're saying, of angry know-it-all comedians. Not entirely, of course, but I think it's being replaced by people who are looking to comedians to offer perspectives and almost more to make sense of things than to shock them. Like, I think we have enough shock. I think there's a little bit of people are just worn out right now, and I'd rather put pieces together. Even if it's a dumb joke about UFOs or how I hate limousines, because I think limousines are the stupidest car in the world. And it's like, that's a dumb thing, but hopefully it gets people out of their heads a little bit. And then if I hit them with something a little bit more relevant, then they're softened a little bit. The guards go down. Yeah. And I think that's nice. I don't like the comedy that makes anybody put their guards up.
Yeah. That's good. I kind of just said the phrase that comedy is like a road that God can travel down. And I think I just said it because it sounded cool and I didn't really think about it. But
it did sound cool.
You can use that if you want. But what it kind of, as I'm sitting here listening to you, comedy, the best comedy, in my opinion, who's not a professional comic, but this is how I feel, is, the best comedy is true. Like, truth is an essential part of comedy. If something is just not true, like it's just not funny because it's not true. It must be true, and you
can tell.
You can tell.
Like, I know that you're making that up.
Yeah, even if you can just tell that somebody's like making up like an experience they had, or like, and then I said, it's like, no, you didn't. It just doesn't hit, and it's not funny. But the other side of it is this phase that we're in. It feels like construction. Like if comedy is constructive, it brings something that is new. Like you said, so much of the world has been torn apart, so much negativity, so much focus on tearing down your other people, whether it's the president or people who like the president or whatever. There's so much value that people think, deconstructing. I mean, that's a weird word, because we talk about deconstruction in the sense of spirituality sometimes. But if comedy is true and it constructs something, if it builds something, it does. I mean, I would consider that along the lines of doing the Lord's work.
Yeah.
Because whether it's
generous
whether you
of
like, whether you like it or not, if something is true, how could it not be what, God is doing? Does that make sense?
I mean, I do think it makes sense in broad. I think I get it. I'm trying to balance, like, trying to get too granular and just letting it be there and hope that you understand it and explain it better than me. What came to my mind was I was when you were like, there's the president, and you can make fun of the president, or you can make fun. What the one everyone loved to make fun of was Donald. I forget his name. He was a president for a second. If I think of it, I'll tell you. But he was president for a second. Trump. Yeah. I made like a point to not make fun of him. For one, I thought it was like more of a challenging exercise. And also, though, I would maintain, and I will die on this hill, he is hands down the funniest president we've ever had. And I can't compete with that. And I think he's genuinely funny, and he cracked me up multiple times during the presidency, as well as infuriated me. But he, I was like, now a bunch of comedians are getting up on open mic night and being like, Donald Trump. And I'm like, Trump's funnier than you, though. Like, you can't make fun of somebody who's funnier than you. Like, he's better at this. He's been doing it for longer. He is the joke. Yeah. You don't have to say it. But anyway, yeah. So that's what came to my brain. But I do agree that it is I try to do it in a way that it serves some kind of purpose. Otherwise, it's just not that. It's not that fun because it becomes a real egoic thing. And I think I've personally become pretty disenchanted, I would say, with a lot of stand-up, because my own stand-up, not others, but really the genre as a whole, because for me, it just became, after a while, this thing of like, what, like, is this doing anything, or is this just me trying to prove that I can be halfway decent at this? And that, I think, is, some people can do that. Like some people who, what's his name? Brian Regan, I think, is a brilliant comedian who stays right there at the surface, like does not do any kind of deeper things, doesn't try to throw in any meanings, any challenges or whatever. And he's a genius. Well, I tend to like putting, a little bit in there that my mom likes to say it tends to fly over people's heads. And I'm like, well, that's perfect. That's exactly what I was not going for. But it is worth a shot when it happens.
Inaccessible and unfunny. That's my style.
That's the name of the new special. Inaccessible and unfunny. So.
Dr. Chris, are you going to start a stand-up comedy career?
All of the careers,
you're a white millennial man, so like you obviously would be good at it.
Yeah. No, sometimes I have been in lots of settings. So, in academia and things like that, you're sitting around in a PhD seminar and talking about very intense and important things. And I have always found that that's the best place for comedy. And I insert jokes opportunistically, generally, but I don't often craft and construct them. But that was actually one of the things that I wanted to talk with Ellie about, as we're talking about artists, and comedy certainly is an art form.
Is it?
Yeah.
I think that's what we were trying to figure out here.
Great question.
Comedy art?
I think the way that you were explaining it, and it really kind of, I think your first stab at my last question, I think even at the end of it, you were feeling like you might not have gotten right to it, but as you continued to talk, you really did touch on that kind of, there is almost a poetry sort of in approaching these areas that can have a tendency to be offensive, but how is there an avenue or a road for us to move into these areas and communicate some kind of truth without offending somebody? And I thought that it was just really interesting, because that's the task of a comedian. And some comedians don't care, and they just come out and they want to offend, and they want shock and awe and to drop people's jaws and things like that. But it sounds like you have a much more respectful and kind of calculated approach, less of a wrecking ball, and more of a maybe scalpel or something, perhaps. But I think, how do you find, does the art of your comedy and your preparation there, does it help you in also having conversations with people about sensitive sorts of issues, and being able to come to people whom you disagree with? Because I'm seeing, and I don't want it to just be some kind of whatever trope or something at this point, but we seem so divided right now as whatever, a nation or people or the world, that there are just these very hard lines where there's things that it's very difficult to talk with people about, whether that be politics or any social issues that are going on or anything like that. So do you find that kind of in preparing your material for your comedy routines, does that ever help you in kind of engaging people just in regular conversation from time to time? It's kind of like an art of comedy and conversation there.
Yeah, I guess I've never thought of it that way, but I think that that's 100% right. Yeah, I think there's this thing called the Bible, guys, and there's this guy named Jesus, and he has this really great one-liner because he could throw out some zingers, but it was something about a speck of sawdust in your neighbors. Have you heard this? It's crazy.
I was literally waiting for you two to shut up so I could bring this up. So this is a wonderful lesson for me. No, Chris, this is it, man. This is my growth. All right,
here we go.
We've finally found it. I've grown. All right, yes, keep going.
Yeah, I would say that is a really good mantra to have and to think about. It's a good moral because I think it's more funny to figure out why I get hung up on things than to decide why somebody else has a particular view. And I do think in everyday conversation, one thing I would put a feather in my cap for a little bit is an ability to see where people are coming from in a respectful way. And I do think that a lot of where we're at right now is just, it's scapegoating, as you said before. And I think that there's just a whole treasure trove of things in our own brains that are usually wrong or need to be dusted off and looked at in a new light. And I think that having a joke and a smile, and not in a way either, because I've seen this too, where people are like, they can't go deep because they have to make a joke the entire time, and that can get frustrating for me. Like, I know people who I can't connect with them on any sort of deep level because they're always going to be throwing out a joke. It's always going to be like, haha, well, what about this? And it's like, there's a happy medium. I think it gets laced through, but if you just use that, then I think you're not going to do anything. It's going to be surface level, and you're not going to be able to learn about people's opinions. But just it can be a more subtle thing, I guess. So I like when I talk and I get really into it, and then the sentence just totally falls off at the end, and I can't find a period for it.
Yeah, powerful. I love
That was really, will probably be, unless you've got some others stored away, one of the most significant takeaways for me here as you were talking about it being more kind of funny or interesting to consider why you're being offended than it is to try and offend someone else's sensibilities. I think everybody could probably take some time and really reflect on that. Thank you. That was a wonderful contribution.
And part of what I hear you saying is that comedy is, we can call it an art and a craft, and it certainly is those things, but it's also a tool. And it's a tool is only as good as not just the person who wields it, but the purpose it's being wielded for, and if it's being wielded correctly, like a joke. In that context you're saying, where like having a deep conversation, a joke can go a long way to taking the concept to the next level, or revealing a truth that's hard to articulate without some sort of deeper emotional instinctual thing like humor. But it can also be wielded as a deflection. And I think that does get frustrating when you're trying to have a deep conversation. It's different if they make a joke that brings the concept deeper versus a joke just used to break tension and deflect maybe a tougher concept to articulate, or a tougher sort of emotional thing to confront. And that's when, guys, I'm sorry I said the shut up word earlier. I didn't mean to say that. Okay, we got kids. Kids, don't say the shut up word. But I just got so excited because, Jesus, this is not, and Dr. Chris, you have to hold me accountable. This is one of your main talents. You got to hold me accountable if I'm off the rails here. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that was so effective about Jesus's ministry and the way that he interacted with people, and especially because he was confronting power directly so often, was when he literally would tell jokes. Like so much of the more powerful things that are so memorable, if you stop for a second and you take it out of like the very serious sort of pious context of church where you must everything is very holy and serious, that when he said, why are you worrying about a speck in my eye when there's a plank in yours? I mean, it's
hilarious.
Literally a joke. I mean, it may not be your taste, but he's creating an image of a giant log sticking out of your eye and complaining about a speck in somebody else's. I mean, it's almost, I would be floored if that is not already like a Far Side cartoon or something.
Right.
A guy pointing.
That's probably where you got it from. Yeah. No, the Far Side was Gnostic, but I agree with everything you're saying, because that's part of, and I think that kind of ties back into a little bit at least of the spiritual side of things. Is in my own experience, I would not in any sense say that I'm like a great comedian. For starters, I just haven't done it in a while, but I love writing comedically, which might be why when I talk, I can ramble a little bit. But a lot of my experiences as an adult have, if it was close to if we want to use the word divine, I guess, or God, it did have a wink to it. It had a kind of a cleverness, and not a cleverness that's like that sort of uppity, like, oh, you're being clever or evasive. It was like, oh, there is a joyfulness to the world and to existence, and it seems to be recognizing that I hear that. Like, I hear some people maybe don't get the, I don't know, maybe they do, but for me, it's like reading things like that and reading a lot of, like we were talking about earlier with the, interpretation where the turning the other cheek is more subversive. All that to me just goes, see, that's cool. Like, that's clever. That gets me excited. And I see that in life, and then it becomes like, okay, there's something going on. So in that sense, comedy, a very broad term, can, I think you could say, be a road that God can travel down.
Yeah. Wow. Look at that. He brought it
I don't know
back
who said
around.
that.
What a professional. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know who said that. You made that up, I think. You said that earlier. Yeah, and you just along those, and we don't need to go around in circles. I don't mean to start another Ouroboros here, but just because I'm excited.
Oh, nice word.
The idea, thank you. The idea of laughter, and so an idea that gets communicated through humor or a joke or something, like I said, that elevates the conversation, or takes an abstract concept to the next level, or whatever, that elicits an uncontrollable reaction, being laughter. And it's not just like a mental or emotional reaction. It's a physical reaction. Like, your body shakes, your breath speeds up, your heart rate speeds up. You make a loud, uncontrollable noise that, if taken out of context, is crazy. Like, it's a crazy noise. If a joke wasn't just said and you made that noise, people would be worried and hiding and ushering their children away from you. But, when that's why I think it's so important. It's, as some wise man once said, comedy is a road that God can travel down. And
I love that.
And part of that is the truth. If the truth elicits a physical convulsion called laughter, I mean, is there anything more powerful in instilling something in your mind? Right. They say when it comes to learning, you learn much faster if you match, a concept with an action. And that's why there's fidget spinners, and that's why there's, breathing techniques, and that's why there's, the physiological things you can do to increase your learning capability. And a truth in a joke that elicits a convulsion goes a long way to not just having a good time and remembering a fact, but sort of integrating a truth into your body, like writing on the hard drive of your mind, connected with sort of a physical reaction. And I am just sort of very impressed with that aspect of creation. I mean, what a genius thing to do for God to create comedy as a very effective thing to, change minds and change the world, Elliot. That's what you're doing, changing the world.
I got to start making people laugh first, but when I do, man, they're going to be blown away.
You'll get there, buddy. You'll get there.
Yeah, thank you. I would add, too, I'm on this kick right now, or I was, I guess. I finished the book, but this, on that note, what you're talking about with like the joke and the sort of putting something in there that causes this physiological reaction, and going back to the speck and the plank in the eye. There's this book called The Master and His Emissary, and it's by a neuroscientist, and it's called The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World. And it's really interesting because he basically makes a case, I would say a very compelling case, for there being these differences in our brain hemispheres that essentially see the world in two different ways. And he's by no means like a strict materialist or anything like that, but he talks a lot about metaphor and a lot about what metaphors do to the brain. And basically the argument is that unfortunately we have a very overly swollen left hemisphere that thinks it's in charge, but the right hemisphere processes metaphor, and it also is more open to ambiguous meanings. And so when you hear a good metaphor, maybe a good joke, good image, it does something that takes it out of the strict category that we like to naturally put things in, and it opens it up. And I think that's very cool.
Yeah.
Just a little plug, because I'm in a real kick with him. I'm going to talk to him. And I'm like, he's also a real smart guy, and this book is really thick, and I'm mostly just bragging that I read a book. So,
yeah. Well, we are very impressed.
One of my favorite pastimes.
Yeah, I'm glad you didn't like give an affiliate code afterwards or something. Otherwise, we would have had.
Yeah, and there'll be an Amazon code down below. Yeah.
I'm wondering, it's funny because you have, as you said, kind of a self-described self-deprecation, and then you work, so closely with Pete Rollins there, and his shtick is kind of that, as I learned firsthand when we had him on, that kind of, Irish sort of insult. So if you're working with him and he's always putting the insults towards you, and then you're also insulting yourself, how does that work? That must get heavy, man.
Sometimes it's like, all right, draw the line there. I think it's not a blanket thing, because after a while of doing like enough self-deprecating stand-up, I definitely was like, okay, well now I've beaten myself up enough and made myself the punchline so much that I'm like, now it's becoming old for me. Like it's no longer challenging.
Somebody say something nice about me, please.
Exactly. Yeah. And unfortunately, Peter Rollins is just a vicious person, so it's hard to get past it. But no, he's also incredibly self-deprecating, and maybe even more so than I am. But now I've gotten to where, because he's Irish, he only has like 6 jokes. Like they don't have an ability to write anything else. So now I can kind of predict when it's coming, and I'll say it right as he says it, and I'm like, haha, you're a computer program, I hacked you. But it does get old. Yeah, self-deprecating when it becomes self-flagellating is a fine line, and I've been there too much. So
yeah, well, there's a point where self-deprecation stops working, because they can tell that it's really about you. It's not about making them laugh. It's you punishing yourself for something.
It's like a therapy session. Yeah,
right.
Like,
yeah.
I'm just so I can't get a girl. Yeah,
kind of like, I mean, you're into psychology and those sorts of things, but if you're talking about that things are only funny because they're true, but then you're making a joke at the expense of yourself. And the truth is that you actually are some kind of screw up or clown or something.
You've revealed the secret.
I mean, it's got to be, it must at some point kind of take some kind of toll on you, right? I mean, you can't, or is it just, are you just okay with,
Well,
have you had that revelation?
It did for sure. Yeah, I think that's a great point, because I definitely, it became something that started as a way to, safely make fun of myself, and also really, truly, kind of lovingly make fun of myself. I mean, in the special I did that's on Amazon, it's like, I can't believe what I said and how open I was about mistakes that I had made. And then following that, after a while, it was sort of like, yeah, this enough is kind of enough there. And it became, like, all right, I did that, I want to move on now and not worry about it. But I think it becomes a little exhausting if you're just like constantly look at how bad I am. And I think it also it can become ironically really, really narcissistic when all you're wanting to do is talk about all of your flaws and all that. It's like, I don't want to hear about some singular person and what they think of themselves all the time, regardless of what it is. Like, you want somebody to enter into where your world is.
A self-centeredness to it, whether you're complimenting yourself or deriding yourself.
C.S. Lewis draws that connection. In Mere Christianity, he talks about that pride can look like both thinking that you're really awesome or thinking that you're really terrible, that it reveals itself in, both of those ways through deep. People. So,
it reminded me of something, and
I'm not calling you prideful, Elliot. Please don't. I mean, no more than the rest of us, at least.
If you have any pride extra, let me know, because
it's funny because I've kind of gone the other way recently, where in my career there are I got one of those voices, I got one of those attitudes, I got one of those things where there's definitely. Especially because my co-hosts, both on this show and on my other shows, are much smarter than me. And so I get lots of emails about, oh my gosh, Basil, you just think you're so funny, don't you? You just focus on yourself all the time. You just, some people are really not big fans, but somehow they keep listening to the show. So I don't know what that is. That I'll let you bring that up in psychology class. But I've recently kind of started going the other way, where I just like to talk about how great I am.
It's the best. Yeah,
it's the best. And of course, it's supposed to be humor because I am the best and the funniest podcaster in the world. But there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it, and I think I mostly do it the wrong way. But when you nail it, it is almost simultaneously complimenting yourself and self-deprecating, because the joke is that it's not true, and so it's complicated, man. It's complicated.
If you can successfully convince people that you really think you are the greatest, smartest person in the world, that's how you get Jordan Peterson's. I'm just kidding.
I was going to say it turns into like the Kardashians or something, where the joke is that,
potato.
Jordan Peterson and the Kardashians. One last thing that made me think deeply when you were talking about the self-deprecation and how it kind of gets you. There is a concept in esoteric things, perhaps some might call them sort of like magical schools of thought or occult schools of thought, where to cast a spell, and casting a spell can include, affecting someone in a way that you want them to be affected, that you need to make a small sacrifice. This can take the form of like, a little bit of blood, or, some hair, or, you give something up. It's the classic, the devil at the crossroads thing. You give something up in order to achieve some goal. And I'm not calling you some sort of dark wizard, but I'm just saying there is a connection here where, making a little sacrifice of yourself in order to affect someone else, there is precedent for that, but as the fairy tales go, if you do that enough, you get addicted to the results, and you end up sacrificing too much of yourself, and bad things happen.
Dude, excellent. Yeah.
Got him.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah. You are the greatest podcaster in the world. No, but for real, that is absolutely... It couldn't be more on the nose and better articulated, for at least the way in the past. And I think maybe this explains. I think maybe this explains part of the reason why I don't get super jazzed up to do a lot of comedy currently. One part of it anyway. But I remember, like, I would get really, really mechanical about it, and I would go through and I would study. I'd make notes on the structure of Mulaney's specials, and I would go through and I'd look at the structure of other comedians, and this is when I was kind of first starting out, and I would go, okay, so almost always they start, that with the something self-deprecating. And I was like, okay, if I'm going to say something that's going to be either controversial or I'm going to be like, really going for it in some other area, you want some sort of favorable disposition in the audience. And the way to do that would be, I think, what you're describing, which is that sacrifice. And so I know for one of my specials, it's like I start out and I immediately start making fun of, I think something about being, Florida. I was like, make fun of my culture of Florida, make sure that I'm being, make sure I'm doing something that shows that there's a humility there. And then it like is a primer almost, but you could also describe it as a dark wizardry. So who knows?
I was thinking that as it was being talked about there, that it's almost like it's an offering of good faith, where it's like, if we're going to have laughs at perhaps someone else's expense, even though I know that you try not to say anything insulting, but still somewhere you're going to touch something that might be sensitive to a person, then if you can, in good faith, step out first and say, look, let's laugh at me first, and then now we'll laugh at you, or we'll laugh at this situation. I think that's a pretty good approach. But I was also thinking about in the self-deprecation too, and I mean, you could look at it, like we were talking about, even maybe some kind of hint of pride or something there. But I think there's something really important about not taking yourself too seriously too. Where there are some people who might, err on the other side of never wanting to have a laugh at their own expense. And I know that I would probably, lean more towards that side than perhaps self-deprecation. Although internally, I'm down on myself and hard on myself quite a bit. It seldom comes out of my mouth, or, I put on at least airs for people sometimes. But then I know sometimes too, like, I'm not always the best at when I slip and fall and spill everything I'm holding, to like laugh at myself and get up and, oh man, that was silly. I'm more like looking around like who's judging me right now. So I think there's something really cool in the fact that you just, cannot take yourself so seriously. If I'm making a right connection there. I mean, I would assume you're that type of person. Man. Just in scrolling through your social media. You don't
Elliot, if Elliot does take himself very seriously, that would be a huge burn. You obviously think yourself a joke, Elliot.
Yeah, I hide my confidence very well, to the point that I've not been able to find it for a while.
I put it somewhere very safe, and I can't.
It's so safe. Yeah, maybe I'll find it over Christmas, but it's one day. But yeah, I think
next
that is. Yeah, there it is. Oh man, who knew? Yeah, it is a lot, and I definitely don't. I don't like the idea of self-deprecation being like a catch-all sort of strategy of comedy. It's helpful at times, and it's good for endearing and all that, but. I'll brag about my fiance. She's also does comedy, and we've talked a little bit in the past, because I can get very heady and I can get very like, this is the, this, I'm going to say this word and then this is going to mean this and I'm going to hit him with, and it's like, I enjoy that process, but it can kind of take the magic out of the comedy a little bit. And it can be like, a lot of these conversations around comedy can also do that, where it's, oh, what is the purpose of it? And what is the role of the comedian? And my fiance is so good at just being like, I just want to make people laugh. I don't care. I just want to make people. And it's like, she just stays right in that lane, and it works great. And she's now getting more into, exploring more substantial or more personal elements to it. But she's doing that by her own volition. It's not like she's doing it because she wants to be that type of comedian. And I think there's value in just being like, it's like the Brian Regans. It's the people who are there to make sure you have a good time, and everything else is just icing on the cake.
The true entertainers. I mean that in the best sense of the word. The true entertainers who, are. It's a little bit different than those of us who like feel like we need to communicate something. We need to change their minds. We need to make them hurt in all the right ways. Something to be said about true entertainers. Love them.
It's really interesting that you brought that up, because overthinking it too much, where it like removes some of the magic, as you were kind of saying, because theological endeavors are like that too, and it's one of the things that we try to caution ourselves about as we're, in academic settings and things like that. But it's like, we're talking about something that is, again, going back to the sacred. And there's a way in which you're almost like, it came up specifically, we were in a pneumatology class talking about the study of the Holy Spirit, and it was like it started to become like an object that was being studied rather than something that was being experienced. It was really interesting to hear you say that about the process of comedy, because it's very relevant in theology as well.
That makes sense. Yeah, it also does remind me a little bit of that the book I was mentioning about the hemisphere differences, because when it's once those categories, it's like dissecting the bird or whatever, and you end up it's hard to get out of that once you put it in it. And I can understand the feeling of being like, I'm studying the Holy Spirit, and it almost becomes like it's here now on the table, and I am analyzing it rationally and understanding it logically and putting words to it. And then you lose the fact that it's probably more of a experience than it is something to be put on an exam table, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you want to take the opportunity and plug your fiance's career so you can get points?
She's doing just fine.
Should.
No, yeah, she's doing. She should be plugging me more.
She's on her own.
Well, then one quick plug is I will be doing stand-up at the Tampa Improv on April 7th. I will be opening for my fiance and her friend. Yeah, they have a podcast called This Might Get Weird, and they do live shows. And so I love the Tampa Improv. And so
this
I'll
is
be
right
doing
down the street from my house. I'm coming.
No way! I didn't know you were in Tampa.
I'm in Tampa.
Well, if you want to come, I can get you comps or whatever. So that would be very fun.
That would be so great. I would love to just meet you too and shake your hand in person.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know. I couldn't think of something. I was going to say some sort of horrible heresy joke, but I couldn't.
Oh, this is so cool. Wow, I didn't know. Tell me the date again.
I'll spend the $2,000. I'll wait outside the back and
thank you.
Let me in. No, I'm very jealous. Good job, Chris.
Yeah, Tampa. The Improv is great.
Yeah, it's fun. It's my favorite. Yeah, favorite place to do it, and it'll be a wild show. Though I will tell you, it is if you want to see, this is not. It's it will be very wild. The people watching alone will be great because it is a quite diverse, colorful, very interesting, and loving crowd.
Okay,
sounds like your crowd, Chris.
Yeah,
I mean, Chris is more used to sort of bearded men in glasses and robes, but you'll leave your robe at home. Yeah.
Hey,
yeah,
you might be surprised. You might be surprised.
That's true. If it's truly diverse, Elliot, there should be some bearded men in robes, or else it's just some sort of simulacra of diversity. Okay.
That's true.
But I'll make sure there's at least one.
There you go. Perfect.
Okay, there was one last thought that I had, and then we can do it, just to tie it back around to the Bible and Jesus and things like that. While we were talking about self-deprecation and humor, I made, oh my gosh, just that brilliant comment about the dark wizardry and like the blood sacrifices and stuff.
Yeah, that was great.
But at the same time, we are called to die to ourselves, to have a certain level of humbleness or sacrifice, our self-interest for the will of the Lord, or for the characteristics of heaven to find themselves here on earth while we're here before the great beyond. And there could be a way of looking at comedy and the self-deprecation as a form of that, if wielded tactfully. It can be used to more effectively communicate truths, and thus open a door for the Lord to do his good work. And that's why I think you're doing the Lord's work, Elliot, and I really appreciate that about you, buddy.
Well, thank you guys, and that's very generous, and you will for sure regret saying that when you see some more of my stuff. So it is not good, but no, thank you very much.
You betcha. And the long list of things that I'm sure I'll regret someday. Chris, do you have any other things you just would die if we didn't get to talk about?
No, I got to them all. I was
Okay.
expecting this to be a wonderful conversation, but I was even still pleasantly surprised. Thank
I
you so
love
much
it.
for your time,
I
Elliot.
love
Thank you,
surprising
guys.
you, Chris.
I've had a lovely time, so thank you guys for having me very much. This has been wonderful, and as long as you guys think I did better than both Pete and Jay, I'm happy. So and you don't have to answer
Yeah.
now. And I could
don't-
talk about
yeah,
Lacan.
don't-
I could talk about Hegel. I can say those names.
I am pretty sure that the second we hang up with Jay and Pete, they're off to the next thing. So as long as you keep thinking about us in your spare time and sort of obsess over the parts of this podcast that you think you did correctly and incorrectly, then in my book, that's a win. I appreciate
Great.
that.
This will consume
yeah.
me. Sweet.
That was it. Elliott Morgan, people, comedian, writer, and friend. Go
Thank
check
you.
him out. We'll talk to you later, Elliott. There you go. You did it. You made it through, and you're better for it. I hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I did. We come into these conversations with a rough idea of the broad strokes, but it's always a pleasure to go through the process of finding those fine details in the conversation. Does that metaphor ring true to you at all? Or should I put it in joke form?
Give it to me in a joke.
Okay, so a comedian, a theologian, and a man-child walk into a bar, and they say, ouch. Thank you. I'll be here next week.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. What a fun talk, huh? Who knew?
Yeah, the of course, the broad strokes worked out very well, as usual, when you do our style of conversational podcasting. We don't have lists of questions that we sort of methodically go through and then piece together the answers in some sort of coherent form. I really enjoyed the process of this one. It seemed like it took maybe the first half hour to 45 minutes to learn where we were going, and then just we're off to the races. I appreciate about Elliot his ability to go to the more abstract and biblical, and oscillating back and forth from, like, I don't know, abstract weird comparisons or thoughts about comedy to appreciating, I think truly appreciating the biblical aspects of life and how we can apply that to comedy and art in general.
Yeah, absolutely. He's as he talked about his spiritual journey is on a little bit of a he's exploring kind of in finding it in new ways, kind of as he talked about, and coming into it kind of in a new season. For some, it might leave a more to be desired. You might like for it to be nailed down a little bit more, but you have to appreciate.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I forgot to do the altar call. We got to call him back.
Oh yeah, we'll get him saved next time.
Okay, good.
We'll get it locked down for sure. But you have to appreciate the honesty and the authenticity, and that is part of what we do here, and kind of exploring various spiritual journeys and perspectives and things like that. And lots of truth, something that we talked about there on the show, that is in essence God.
Yeah, exactly, precisely. And there are people who will listen to this who their instinct will, to, like you said, sort of be not fully satisfied with the ease at which we kind of could breeze past his current state in his spiritual journey, his path to and from and hopefully back to God, in a way that is meaningful, not just to him but also to God. And I enjoyed his openness to where he's ending up. You know, the appreciation for the fact that he is in a process. And I think if you are sort of evangelistically minded, I think there's something very valuable to seeing life in its broadness, and its not just broadness in length of time, but also its depth in the process of finding the place that God wants us to be. And who knows? I'm just glad that he's very focused on the truth, the real thing, whatever's the right thing to happen, which I appreciate very much. Chris, we are literally waiting for the phone call right now. At any moment, he will move from one state to another. No longer Dr. Christopher Ryan Gates, but Daddy Christopher Ryan Gates.
I thought you were going to go with Father, but
Father.
yeah.
You would want me to go with Father, wouldn't you?
It legitimately could be any moment right now. We are, as we record this, somewhere around 5 to 6 days past our due date. But she's feeling like perhaps it might be soon. So almost certainly the next time you hear my voice on this show, I will be a father.
Wow. Incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible.
We're pumped.
Okie dokie. Apologies that the last episode with Margaret took a couple extra days. There's daddy things going on and also technical things going on. It's an interesting conglomeration of events that caused that episode to come out a little bit late. We apologize to Margaret for that, but we know that you guys enjoyed that episode too. So send in your questions or comments. contact@ravelpodcast.com. Leave your ratings and reviews. It's extremely helpful, especially at this stage of the game. And if you want to get involved in the podcast, become a producer in any way, send us an email, and we'd love to chat with you about that. Anything else?
That's all the things.
That's all the things. Thanks, everybody, for listening to this episode of Ravel. We can't wait to talk to you again. And Chris, any last words?
Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to Ravel. To learn more about who we are, what we believe, or how to support this ministry, visit our website at ravelpodcast.com. If you have a question you would like answered on the show, or to let us know how we're doing, email us at contact@ravelpodcast.com. This project is made possible by the prayers and generosity of listeners just like you.
I like to just sort of run towards the cliff and see what happens.